Hello, hello, hello. Finish another book, talking about Semicolon by Cecilia Watson. It's going to be backwards for y'all, probably. But no, great book, honestly. Very short, like, I think it's about like 170 pages, more or less, not including the acknowledgements and the, what do you call the crap at the end? Whatever, basically just like your reference points, right? So whenever there's like terminology or definitions, you can look them at the end. Index? Is it called an index? I don't know. Anyways, I guess that sort of goes to a point in this. Like this book, I mean, it being a book, yeah, but it's more like a thesis, or more like an academic paper. Sort of interesting in that way, honestly. This, I guess, author, writer, Cecilia Watson. She's a professor of some sorts. But no, great book, honestly, really good. Mainly just for obviously learning about the semicolon, but like punctuation as a whole. And then past that, just like the use of English language, in regards to things like punctuation, but also like how punctuation plays like a very crucial role in things like, like flow, or, overall flow for like a piece of writing. But then also just for like general expressions, like regarding writing, right? This book is like very technically deep in some ways. Like this is the first book that I was reading, and like as I was reading it, I was doing little like annotations basically. So I got like a bunch of sticky notes inside of it. So the book is like slightly thicker than it should be. Very thin book. But yeah, but most of the stuff I was writing, like some of the stuff like within the book, just writing about it and how interesting I was finding it. But then also mainly definitions for like a lot of words, and then also definitions for words that I had like kind of forgotten. I mean, I hadn't been like in school like in a really long time, and I mean, like English was always really interesting to me, so there's that too. But yeah, just like terminology stuff, like syntax, or like syntax, rhetoric, and then also like smaller stuff that I didn't really understand, or like terminology things where like I pretty much knew like what they were trying to say, but so just kind of wrote the definitions down because I didn't think there were like words for them. Like I think the term is pronounced like rhetorician, and it's just people who like kind of study rhetoric, and then things like grammarians and stuff like that, people who are like involved in the use of grammar, just like small things, right? Small but interesting things. Let's see if I got something kind of poignant in one of my a lot of it's definitions, honestly. But I guess talking about like the actual book itself, it starts off sort of simple, and I think in a lot of ways it's sort of exactly what I thought it would be, but then very, very different, which I guess you could say about anything. But anyways, no, because obviously just with the like title card, semicolon, past, present, and future of a misunderstood mark. I mean, the assumption is we're just going to talk about the semicolon like throughout history, right? And that is what the book is about in a very large part. But again, it's also about like the deconstruction of, I guess, rules within like English writing specifically, rules in writing in general, honestly, because a lot of the examples, while most of them are sort of like more like English speaking people, like there are examples from, say like German writers mainly, but so foreign language writers, right? In the way that they'll use punctuation, and the way they'll express themselves through writing, and how that can be different from people here in America. But then also in America, like a lot of like the rule development for like English writing, and like how that kind of came about, and like the way it's been like used, and the way it evolves like throughout history, which honestly kind of good. So this ends up being like a small history book in some parts. Okay, there you go. I guess that was her title, like historian, technically, academic historian. But yeah, because like there's some examples really early on, mainly like regarding obviously like some of the first few people who would have like taken a large interest in writing. So like your like more classical like grammarians, but then it begins to evolve, like how like the language was used, or like how the writing was used, like just for like everyday people, but then also like within the culture for things like government. There's a lot of examples of like different court cases, and like how they've like been ruled or like changed to be ruled, like laws like being changed, but then also like specific rulings within these court cases that were decided just on the punctuation of it all. There's a really good little bit about, so one of the examples used about two Italians who were sentenced to murder, or like sentenced for murder, and the sentencing for the two of them was slightly different because a semicolon was used in a certain place, and everybody like just assumed like, oh, like the punishment's divided, like this guy's gonna get death penalty and then this guy's gonna basically get like community service for life, you know what I mean? So just interesting that the way people kind of perceive the mark, because again it's a very, well, I mean, like the title card says, misunderstood mark, but then I think this goes in large part to like flow, because I've talked about the example before where I use semicolons a lot personally, just because again, to me, with like the writing stuff, it's always been about directly sort of relaying like the way I'm talking in real life, right? Like all of my little pauses and stuff, and I think the semicolon captures it perfectly, just because the semicolon is a slightly longer pause and I am connecting two ideas within the sentence. So like I know the rule roughly, but I definitely don't use it right like all the time, but it's meant to give the person that I'm messaging, or like whenever I'm writing stuff and I'm reading it back, it's just meant to give me like a small pause and then I can move on. But that being said, just like how much punctuation is out there, like you could always do something different. I mean, like a comma would work just as well. Just a full period could be pretty good too. I rarely use colons, honestly, but I might start using them more. And then the example that comes up like towards the end, because like they also mention things like parentheses and stuff, and I mean like that's used every so often, but more in like my own personal writing. I don't really use that for messaging, but anyways, because then it just sounds like I'm giving this person like an academic reading if I'm using parentheses. But then that's like another part of the book, this idea of like it's a large wasp, this idea of like a sort of like pretension regarding punctuation sometimes, which I mean, I guess you could argue that I kind of fall into, but again, like messaging this friend, and then one day he finally mentioned to me like, hey, I don't think you're using semicolons right. But that's just because he's also really into language as well, or really into English and stuff. When we were talking about it, he used to be into it when he was in high school and stuff. But anyways, so like I'd known about this book for a little while. I feel like this is something I should have said at the beginning, but like, and finally reading it, it just kind of confirmed a few things for me, and that was the main thing. This idea that punctuation is able to like, just give your writing a better voice, your own voice as a writer. And I mean, I'm not gonna really go call myself a writer or anything like that, but I do like to write, and I always found writing really interesting, just for the expression of it, I guess, right? But then just like as an art, like I like reading stuff, and there's usually a lot to pick out like from words, and obviously like combinations of words, like their placement, so like the syntax and the rhetoricism of it all. But this book really went into that and sort of makes an argument about the use of punctuation, especially in more modern English, and how it should be used in a more expressive manner. And the rules, while necessary in a lot of ways, because that's kind of the argument that's made like throughout the whole way, talking about like early grammarians and the sort of rules that they were making for writing, and how quickly like they would change just because like different people from all around the world are writing in very different ways. And then sometimes like things just get completely outdated, or like the understanding of language and the way language is evolving within the culture changes, obviously. So that must mean the rules change. Like the rules can't really be stagnant, because the rules are like trying to govern something that's so, I don't know, so I guess just like ever changing, to put it simply, right? I mean, like think about the way we talk now, just like day to day, right? And like how sort of bizarre it is. Like obviously, like if you want to bring the more like cultural aspects into it, more like internet culture, slang, right? There's not really a lot of room for punctuation in the same way. And that being said, there's not a lot of use for the rules in the same way, but messages can be conveyed in such a way that will mean exactly what you mean without having to pertain to any sort of rules from the English language. So then at that point, what's the point of the rules, right? But there's bits and pieces about that sort of argument, like the rules and their place within writing as a whole. And obviously, like, it has its places. Don't get me wrong. There's some examples, obviously, from like a lot of academic papers and whatnot. So obviously, like, the rules exist for like those sorts of things, right? Mainly for like academia. But then, yeah, just like the more everyday life stuff. I mean, like, every day, like, how often are you using a semicolon, right? How often are you using colons, parentheses? I mean, like, people use periods and commas pretty often. Maybe an exclamation point every now and then. But again, like, the semicolon's just kind of confusing because it's this middle mark between different, potentially more useful and obviously more common punctuation. Yeah, there's lots of really good bits in the book too. Again, just like more like historical accounts of semicolon usage, and just like, again, like how it causes this stir because like people get like kind of antsy like around the semicolon. It's like, I mean, if writing is meant to be like interpretation and whatnot, like that means we can interpret this semicolon as like kind of whatever we want it to be, you know what I mean, since it is so rarely used. And that comes up a few times, like, again, like with some of the more like judicial stuff, but then also the just like laws like within cities, like there's a really good chapter about Boston and how there were laws in Boston like regarding alcohol consumption. And again, like a semicolon gets used in place that sort of makes it seem like, hey, after 10 o'clock you can't serve alcohol anymore. But then, you know, people's thing was like, oh, well, I mean, it didn't say we can't drink alcohol anymore. It didn't say that, you know, after 10, even if we bought the alcohol, say at like 9:59, we can't, you know, continue drinking it, sort of thing, you know. But again, like nuances and sort of like caveats within like conversation and obviously within the use of English language was really interesting. And, you know, some of the anecdotes about that were really well done, or, you know, really like well used, I guess, and obviously well researched. It's a very well researched book. And again, like, despite it being so short, there's like a lot of information packed in here. And then obviously something I really liked as well is, like, despite it feeling a bit more academic, like, this is one of the first books I read that has like footnotes in it. So even then, you know, just like reading a little bit and then seeing the asterisks and then having to go to the bottom of the page and read the footnotes for like further explanation. This book has a lot of the author's voice in it, which I think is really good. Like, you can really get a feel for like the way she talks and the way they express themselves, which I found really interesting and obviously really like gratifying and engaging, honestly, because then it just feels like I'm having this conversation with this person and they're relaying all this information to me, which is obviously kind of what I look for a lot of the time in storytelling, this idea that somebody's talking to me. But it was nice, and I got that a lot from this book, which was really cool, honestly. And honestly, very, very funny author at times, but again, just very expressive with their writing, right? And their use of punctuation a lot of times to fit for examples within like the narrative of the story. Like, again, like whenever I talk about the dash, they're making a case for the dash and its usage within English language, and in the paragraph that's explaining this, they are going out of their way to use dashes, you know, for example purposes, but then also just to, you know, further convey the point, right? They do that a lot with their semicolon usage, but then also like punctuation of different standards, say, you know, your parentheses and whatnot. But no, again, just very engaging book. And honestly, it's weird, like, despite it being so short, the reason why it sort of took me so long to read was, one, just doing annotations, but then two, just going back to read like certain chapters like every now and then, honestly. Like, obviously, like, finding definitions for words was very fun, and I'm probably just gonna have to go back and like read from time to time. But then also just like really good examples, like another good example, something that was brought up, was the fact that a really good way to learn English and, you know, like usage of punctuation and whatnot is to just like copy like writers when you can, and like copy their way of writing, copy the way they use punctuation, right? You know, writers in general, but obviously, you know, your more classical writers, or even then just like writers you like happen to like, because it gives you a feel for like obviously like voice, but then just punctuation usage, right? Like, there's like bits and pieces like within the book that are just taken from other books. I'm pretty sure that's a Cormac McCarthy thing, right? Like books are made of other books. let me see if I can find an example, because there are really good, you know, maybe I won't be able to find an example, but there are really good like moments, or just like honestly really profound sentences that sort of make me need to go and like read the books where the examples came from, because some of this stuff is really interesting. And then again, like just talking about like flow and like sort of the way an author is conveying themselves, it gets really interesting a lot of the time. And then obviously people's like interpretation of like a writer's work, like the way the writer uses punctuation and like the way they're like trying to speak to the reader, becomes very like nuanced as well. And the nuances come from punctuation usage. They come from just like the general flow of a paragraph, like sentence flow. But then obviously sentence flow, or just like flow in general within writing, is dictated by the punctuation. There's a really good example about a racehorse. But then it becomes a metaphor in some ways as well. Like the punctuation use is sort of like the jockey like reining in the horse, but then the flow of words that will come after the semicolon, or after the punctuation use, is sort of like just letting the horse run free, right? And the horse, of course, is meant to represent like the flow of the writing, and then the jockey and the reins are the punctuation. So that was a really good example, and just a way of sort of like visualizing it for a reader. It definitely got in my head, and it was a good example. But I mean, it's true, right? And I guess going back to me, whenever I was in school, I feel like there were rules, and they were trying to teach us rules, but not that I didn't care about the rules necessarily, but they never really made sense to me for conveying certain things that I wanted to convey. But then obviously with school and stuff like that, everything's like curriculum based, right? There is a way things are supposed to be done, so they will be done in those ways, which is very restricting. And that's another sort of argument in the book, the fact that the rules can be restricting in some ways, and they don't leave for this like expression that is the art of writing, right? But again, like the reason why I said it was sort of validating for me in some ways, because it sort of proves this idea that, or not proves necessarily like, oh, okay, yeah, that means I was right all along, like fuck the rules, but shows that other people think about it in the same way, right? So it was validating to my emotions, I guess. But yeah, the fact that writing is more, or that writing can be more than rules. There's a very good example towards the end. I mean, like I briefly brought up like culture, internet culture, like slang and stuff, but obviously with the conversation regarding English and like regarding grammar, using that like as a pinpoint to put other people down. Like there's a sort of elitism within grammar itself. And obviously that can come from punctuation use. People thinking they're like elitist and above it all because they know how to use a semicolon. But then also like for very simple people like us, right? I mean, like think about how many times you were probably online and saw somebody use like "they're" wrong. You know what I mean? Or just like saw somebody like use like a comma like in the wrong way. Stuff like that. But like whenever people mess up in those ways, it's like an immediate thing for a lot of other people who are in these arguments to just like dismiss what they have to say. You know what I mean? So like there is an importance to English, but putting it over what the person was trying to say and what they meant, because obviously I think whenever you're reading stuff, it's very obvious what somebody wants to mean sometimes, but it is just about interpretation. But then obviously like punctuation and stuff like that helps convey the message easier, so it's harder to misinterpret what somebody was trying to say. But the example in the book, just like just like bringing up that idea, like how many times are you online and like see somebody like use, or just like use grammar like in an incorrect way, and like their opinion gets dismissed, like despite the opinion being quite profound, they used a comma where they shouldn't, so now the whole like opinion is void, sort of thing. There's some really good stuff about that, like in a more modern history. Like I think the example has to do with Obama and Romney, which was really interesting. There's a really good piece from the letters from Birmingham jail by Martin Luther King that's in the book, and that was really good just to read. And again, like going back to the example of the jockey and the horse, right? The way Dr. King was able to just use semicolon to really exaggerate the points that he was trying to make, but then also to give pause so you could like reflect on the previous point before you're just thrust into the new point, which is equally, you know, in some ways as horrifying, you know, just like the description of injustice, but very good point in the book, and that comes towards the end. So I mean, spoiler, but you have something to look forward to now, right? But then the last paragraph, the last chapter, and the way that sort of like sums everything up, very good, very good. But yeah, honestly, enjoyed the book immensely. Again, sort of what I thought it would be, but then also just way more. Very, very good read, honestly, and I enjoyed it a lot, and I'll probably have to revisit it from time to time, again, just to like enjoy the writing of it, but then also just to remind myself of like certain things within like English language, but then, you know, maybe some definitions, because I think some terminology in here is like kind of important to know, especially if I want to keep, you know, reading and writing. I think it's nice to know these things. Again, it's like I guess examples for other stuff, right? Just like other media, you know, like whenever you learn like in music, like different music terminology, just because you love music so much, so then whenever you're enjoying other pieces of music, you can like pinpoint these like, you know, things, you know, like certain like skills, or what's the better word, techniques, there you go, certain techniques that are used like within music, like, you know, through the production, or like maybe the lyricism, or a combination of the both, right? But then also like in movies, like knowing about cinematography and knowing about, you know, shit like camera angles or lighting and stuff. So I guess that falls into cinematography. But anyways, but knowing these things like in some ways kind of enhances your enjoyment of stuff. You know what I mean? But that's why I think it's important to learn a lot of the time. The teachings go on, sort of thing, right? But yeah, that's about it. Again, enjoyed it. Probably gonna have to let my friend borrow this book, so then he can keep correcting me whenever I use a semicolon wrong. But yeah, take care.